fact, the temporary picture of the eternal creation. The forgetful soul has no information of the spiritual creation, known as the Sanatan Dham. But the temporary creation gives an idea of this original creation. The devotees of the Lord, therefore, make the best use of the bad bargain by utilizing the temporary creation in the service of the Lord. Everything emanates as different energies from the Lord, and thus everything should be engaged for His service only. As soon as even temporary things are engaged in His service, they take on permanent values. The process of such engagement in the service of the Lord is what the sages call chikitsitam, or well treated. If we have some kind of trouble in the stomach from drinking milk, the physician prescribes the same milk in the form of curd, which is nothing but treated milk. Similarly, the temporary creation of the material world is undoubtedly full of miseries. But when accepted in terms of its relation with the Supreme Lord, the whole thing becomes as well treated as the curd. Everything accepted in full God consciousness has its spiritual value, and by the grace of the Almighty, its material effects are diminished in terms of the increasing degree of spiritual consciousness. That is the process for cultivating the human spirit. 29. Thus the rainy season came to an end. The autumn began, and there were no more clouds in the sky. All the reservoirs of water became crystal clear, and the wind was no longer forceful. Lord Krishna, along with his elder brother, Lord Baladev, thus lived at Vrindavan in this auspicious season. When the sky is clear of all clouds, there is no longer any distinction between the portion of the sky that was covered and that which was never covered. Similarly, when the living entity, now covered by the modes of material nature, is freed from ignorance, passion, and so-called goodness, he becomes one with the Absolute Truth. Such oneness is called mukti, or freedom from the miseries of material life. There are 5 different kinds of mukti. Impersonalists prefer to merge into the existence of the transcendence, but the personalists or devotees do not annihilate their individuality, and thus the devotees of the Lord individually enjoy spiritual variegatedness on the planets of the spiritual sky. The material sky is also the spiritual sky, but it is covered by the modes of material nature. This material nature is also a temporary creation of the Lord, as the cloud is a creation of the sun. When the cloud of the material modes is cleared off, the material nature is said to have been annihilated. There are 2 kinds of living entities, namely the conditioned and the pure. It is for the conditioned living entities that the material nature is created, and the conditioned souls are put into it to become pure, unconditioned souls. Those who become unconditioned by devotional service enter into the eternal kingdom of God, and those who lose the chance rot in dormant material conditions, sometimes manifested and sometimes non-manifested. Lord Sri Krishna descends to reclaim the conditioned souls. 30. In autumn, all the reservoirs of water become enriched with growing lotuses. The muddy water again becomes normally clear and decorated, as fallen conditioned souls once more become spiritually enriched by devotional service. Prabhupada. We should not be disappointed in our muddy life of material existence, for as soon as we voluntarily take to the devotional service of the Lord, our whole life becomes clear, like water in autumn. Devoid of our relationship with God, our life is barren. But as soon as the muddy mind is cleared by spiritual association or cultivation of the human spirit, the threefold miseries of material life are at once cleared off. Thus the lotus of knowledge gradually fructifies, and this gradual process of development ushers in transcendental bliss. The whole spiritual process is technically called yoga, or linking with the Supreme. It is something like a long staircase, and the upward steps are variously designated as regulated work, transcendental knowledge, mystic powers, and ultimately bhakti yoga, devotional service. Bhakti yoga is pure and unalloyed, being entirely beyond the preliminary steps. Such unalloyed devotional service in favor of the Supreme Lord was displayed at Vrindavan when the Lord descended there, and thus the yoga exhibited by the gopis of Vrindavan is the highest unalloyed love of Godhead, the perfection of bhakti yoga. To rise to the stage of love shown by the gopis is very difficult, but this stage is attainable for serious conditioned souls. Unfortunately, cheap neophytes make a show of the transcendental ecstasies of the gopis, bringing them onto the mundane plane for perverted manifestations, and thus clearing the way to hell by such unwanted caricatures. Serious students of yoga, however, practice it seriously, and thus they attain the highest perfection in bhakti yoga, as stated in the Bhagavad Gita. Yoginam api sarvesham mad gatenantaratmana shradhavan bhajate yomam same yukta tamomataha. And of all yogis, he who always abides in me with great faith, worshipping me in transcendental loving service, is most intimately united with me in yoga, and is the highest of all. 31. The four prominent features of autumn are that there is no water in the sky. The weeds that grew here and there in the rainy season all wither away. The muddy roads and fields dry up, and the ponds of water become crystal clear. These four features of the autumn atmosphere are compared to the four orders of life. Prabhupada. In the Varnashrama system, the student goes to the ashrama of the master to take lessons from him and serve him, even as a menial servant. These troubles of the student are at once mitigated when he attains transcendental knowledge in terms of his relation with Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead. As the white clouds no longer bear the burden of water in the autumn sky, the student finds that the troubles of drawing water for the master becomes a burdenless job if the student, by the grace of his master, attains to spiritual knowledge. Householders who beget children without restriction, like weeds in the rainy season, become solitary as soon as they attain to the stage of devotional service. The family planning of a godless civilization cannot check weed-like unwanted population. People should learn to check sex life by voluntary restraint. This voluntary restraint is possible when one is dovetailed with the service of the Lord. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina. Rasavarjam rasopyasya param drishva nivartate. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, though the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. Bhagavad Gita 2:59. Well-situated devotees of the Lord refrain from materialistic sense enjoyment, for they are attracted by the beauty of transcendence. Forcible restraint by regulative family planning or similar artificial means cannot work very long. One must be attracted by the transcendence. One can give up the inferior quality of enjoyment as soon as one receives the superior quality of spiritual enjoyment. So family planning is successful when one is engaged in the culture of the human spirit. The vanaprasthas, who voluntarily avoid cleaning themselves and who allow their beards and nails to grow, no longer feel the discomforts of these burdens when they engage in the service of the Lord. And above all, the mendicants who take a vow to refrain from sex life no longer feel sexual urges when fixed in the transcendental service of the Lord. Therefore, in all four of the spiritual orders and the four grades of social life, devotional service to the Lord is essential. Without this relationship, all the regulative principles of varna and ashrama become burdensome duties, as they have in the age of Kali. When the regulative principles have no aim, the varnas become a caste system, and the ashramas become the business of various shopkeepers. All these anomalies of the present social system can be reformed only by cultivation of the human spirit in the devotional service of the Lord. 32. The beautiful white clouds, freed from all burdens of water distribution, floated in midair, like mendicants freed from all family responsibilities. Prabhupada. As long as one is attached to the so-called responsibilities of family burdens, he is always full of cares and anxieties about meeting his family expenses. The four orders of social life, as designed in the varnashrama system, are very scientific and cooperative. In student life, one is taught the primary principles of the human form of life. One who enters the householder's life can execute the duties of a family man because he has already been trained for this job in the brahmachari ashrama. After 50 years of age, the householder retires from family life and prepares for the life of sannyas. The householder is duty-bound to maintain the members of all three of the other ashramas, namely the brahmacharis, the vanaprasthas, and the sannyasis. Therefore, every member of society was given a chance to retire for a higher order of spiritual culture, and the householders neglected no one. The brahmacharis, vanaprasthas, and sannyasis all curtailed their necessities to the minimum, and therefore no one would begrudge maintaining them in the bare necessities of life. In Kali Yuga, however, the entire system has gone topsy-turvy. The student lives in luxury at the expense of the father or the father-in-law. When the educated, indulgent student becomes a householder by the strength of university degrees, he requires money by all means for all kinds of bodily comfort, and therefore he cannot spare even a penny for the so-called vanaprasthas and sannyasis. The vanaprasthas and sannyasis nowadays are those who were unsuccessful in family life. Thus, the so-called sannyasis try to construct another home in the name of the sannyas ashrama and glide down into all sorts of luxury at the expense of others. So all these varnas and ashramas have now become so many transcendental frauds. But that does not mean that there is no reality in them. One should not conclude that there is no good money simply because one has met with counterfeit coins. The sannyas ashrama is meant for complete freedom from all anxieties, and it is meant for uplifting the fallen souls who are merged in materialism. Unless the sannyasi is freed from all cares and anxieties, like a white cloud, it is difficult for him to do anything good for society. 33. There are waterfalls flowing from the hills of the forest, but sometimes water does not flow from them. So the waterfalls are not like ordinary rainfall. They are compared to great reformers who speak or do not speak as the time requires. Prabhupada. There are two different kinds of religious preachers. One of them is called the professional preacher, and the other is called the acharya. The professional preachers are like the rainfall from the sky, but the acharyas are like waterfalls. The professional traders in Bhāgavatam and Ramayana will speak from the portion of the scripture that will appeal to the mundane senses of the audience. For example, the professional Bhāgavatam reciter will generally speak on the subject of Rasa Lila, which appears to the layman to be something like the dealings of ordinary men and women. Thus, the professional reciters earn money from their so-called admirers. But an acharya will never speak on Rasa Lila to the general mass of people. The Rasa Lila chapters of the Bhāgavatam are the most confidential part of the scripture, and they are meant for advanced students of spiritual realization. In the Bhāgavatam there are 12 cantos, and the Rasa Lila is the 10th. So before one comes to the 10th canto, the Bhāgavatam tries to convince one of the transcendental nature of the absolute truth. Unless one has grasped the spiritual status of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one is sure to accept him as an ordinary man, and thereby commit offenses at his lotus feet by so many unwanted activities. The Acharya is he who knows the scriptures well and teaches his disciple in terms of the disciple's capacity to understand and advance in spiritual realization. Therefore he sometimes does not speak and sometimes speaks. The holy messages of Godhead have to be received from the realized soul and not from the professional man. Although rainwater and the waterfalls are the same, the water from the waterfalls has a different effect than ordinary rainwater. One should not accept messages from the professional men, as one should not accept milk touched by the tongue of a serpent. Milk is good, but as soon as it is touched by the snake, it becomes poisonous. The Acharya, therefore, is not a mercenary order supplier like the professional reciter of scriptures. 34. Small pools of water accumulate during the rainy season, and in the autumn they gradually dry up. The little creatures playing in those small pools do not understand that their days are now numbered and will end very soon. Thus they are like foolish men who do not care for the nearing day of their death, but become absorbed in the so-called enjoyment of family life. Foolish politicians are too attached to family life. A big politician means a big family man. An ordinary family man is attached to his limited family of wife and children, but big politicians extend the same family feeling to a wider circle and thus become encumbered by false prestige, honor, and self-interest. The politician never retires from politics even if he has enjoyed many covetable posts like that of minister or president. The older he is, the more he is attached to his false prestige. Even at the fag end of his life, he thinks that everything will be spoiled without him. He is so foolish that he does not see that many other politicians who thought like him have come and gone, with no gain or loss for want of them. These family men, big and small, are like the small fish in the pools of water that gradually dry up in the autumn. They are foolish because they think that their attachment to their family, even at the end of their lives, will be able to protect them from the cruel hands of death. As already mentioned, the human life must be divided into 4 component parts. The student life must be divided into 4 As already mentioned, the human life must be divided into 4 component parts. The student life, the householder life, the preparative life, or preparative, and the life of dedication to the service of the Lord. One must retire from all sorts of family life, big or small, at the age of 50, and thus prepare for the next life. That is the process of human culture. The householders are allowed a pension from service so that they can live for a higher cultural life. But foolish men, reluctant even to accept this person, want to artificially increase the duration of their life. Such foolish men should take lessons from the drying pools of water and should know, in their own interests, that life is eternal, continuing even after death. Only the body changes, whether spiritually or materially. An intelligent man should be careful to know what sort of body is going to be awarded him, and thus he must prepare for a better life in other planets, even if he is reluctant to go back to Godhead. 35. When the small pools of water become too hot because of the scorching heat of the autumn sun, the poor small creatures with their many family members suffer terribly, as poor householders with too many family members suffer economic strains and yet go on begetting children because of uncontrolled senses. Prabhupada. Human life is meant for controlling the senses, for uncontrolled senses are the cause of material bondage. But for fools, sense enjoyment is the pivot of life's activities. All men undergo hard, laborious duties all day and night, and in all seasons of the year, only for the sake of sense pleasure with their mates. These foolish creatures have no information of other enjoyment. In a godless civilization especially, sense pleasure, accepted in the name of culture and philosophy, is all in all. Men who are addicted to this pleasure are called kripanas. When the kripanas have too many children, they suffer the scorching heat of family life, and then similar leaders advise them to undertake family planning. The idea of this family planning is that sense pleasure should not be curtailed, but birth control should be accomplished by artificial measures. Such measures of birth control are called Bruna Hatya, or killing the child in embryo. Such killing is a sinful act, and in the revealed scriptures, a specific hell is designated for those who commit such sins. Spiritual culture means pursuing a better engagement in life. When a man engages in such cultural life, the desire for mating automatically abates, and the sufferings of uncontrolled family life are mitigated without artificial means. The attention of a human being, therefore, should be drawn to the cultivation of the human spirit. For this will gradually protect him from all sorts of discomfiture and elevate him to a higher status of life for real and eternal enjoyment in personal contact with the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. 36. With the progress of the autumn season, the moist earth and muddy places begin to dry up, and the green vegetation begins to fade. This drying up and fading resembles the gradual disappearance of the false sense of affinity and ego. Prabhupada. Progress in cultivating the human spirit entails the gradual disappearance of the materialistic ego. Covered by ignorance, passion, and so-called goodness, the spirit soul thinks himself all in all and is covered by a false sense of ego. Thus he falsely identifies the soul with the body, and his bodily relations with material things become the objects of his attraction. This false identification and attraction for matter gradually dry up and fade away by success in the cultivation of the human spirit. That is the effect of such higher cultivation. Progress in spiritual culture brings about the disintegration of false ego and material attraction. The ultimate goal of cultivating the human spirit is God realization and surrender unto God with a full sense of his all-pervasive nature. When a liberated soul thus surrenders unto the lotus feet of the all-pervading Godhead, the ocean of nescience becomes as insignificant to him as the water in the small hoofprint of a calf. He at once becomes eligible to be promoted to the spiritual kingdom, and he has nothing to do with the miserable land of the material world. Cultivation of the human spirit is not, therefore, mere adjustment of materialistic anomalies. It is the process for preparing oneself to be promoted to the spiritual kingdom. No one can adjust the sufferings of material existence, but by spiritual culture one can elevate himself from the effects of such miserable life. As an example, one may cite the condition of a dry coconut. The dry coconut pulp automatically becomes separate from its outer skin. Similarly, the outer skin, or the gross and subtle material coverings of the soul, automatically separates from the spirit soul, and the spirit soul can then exist in spiritual existence, even though apparently within the dry skin. This freedom from the false sense of ego is called the liberation of the soul. 37. With the inauguration of the autumn season, the rough sea becomes calm and quiet, just like a philosopher after self-realization, who is no longer troubled by the modes of nature. The result of self-realization is cessation of the storms of desire and lust, which are products of the modes of ignorance and passion. This cessation of the storm does not mean that the sea becomes inactive. When the storm subsides, the work of navigation can take place smoothly. According to the Indian system of navigation, there is a ceremony on the seashore known as the Coconut Day. On the Coconut Day, the sea is offered a coconut because she has become peaceful. And from that day on, the seagoing vessels sail to foreign countries. The three modes of nature divide human activities into two different spheres, one external and the other introspective. As long as a man is dominated by the modes of ignorance and passion, he is active externally in desire and lust. Men absorbed in desire and lust are called asuras, and they are always chasing after women and money. For the sake of women and money, the asuras exploit every source of economic development. As a result of this asuric civilization, the entire human society becomes like a stormy sea, with no trace of peace and prosperity. Too much of an external view of the world gives rise to an overly large scale and difficult type of industry and trade known as ugra karma. The word ugra means hard or difficult, and karma means task. The development of hard and difficult industrial undertakings always hinders the progressive cultivation of the human spirit. Asuric leaders of society never retire from such lustful undertakings unless killed by the laws of nature. For them, there is no question of retirement or of cultivating the human spirit. But men in the mode of goodness have an introspective mind, and after a regulative struggle for existence, they retire at a ripe old age and engage their time to cultivate the human spirit. According to the Varnashrama principle, it is compulsory that one retire after the age of 50, without considering other circumstances. Business offices close at a fixed hour, no matter what balance of work remains. Similarly, after the age of 50, one must retire from the active external life and devote oneself to the introspective cultivation of the human spirit. This retirement must be compulsory, so that foolish old men will no longer disturb the peaceful progress of spiritual culture. In the modern democratic government, no one should be elected after the age of 50. Otherwise, the storm of the ocean of nescience cannot be stopped to allow the ships and boats to sail back to Godhead. The greatest enemies to progressive spiritual culture in human society are the old fossils of political parties, who are blind themselves and who try to lead other blind men. They bring about disaster in a peaceful human society. The members of the younger generation are not as stupid as the old politicians, and therefore by state law, the foolish politicians must retire from active life at the age of 50. 38. After the rainy season, the farmers begin to rebuild the partitioning walls of the paddy fields so that the water will be conserved, just as yogis try to use their conserved energy for self-realization. Prabhupada. The living being is the marginal energy of the absolute personality of Godhead. And he can spend his conserved energy either externally or internally. When spent internally, the energy is identified with the internal energy of the personality of Godhead, but the same conserved energy, when spent for his external energy, is identified with that external energy. All energies, internal, external, and marginal, are emanations from him, the Supreme, and they act differently to prove diversity and unity. The unity is the Lord, and the energies represent diversity. The Lord is so powerful that he can do anything and everything merely by his sweet will alone. As mentioned above, everything is done by his energies in a natural way, with full knowledge and complete perfection. That is the information we have from the Vedic literatures. The internal energy and the marginal energy are the same superior quality. But the external energy is inferior. The internal energy and the marginal energy are of the same superior quality, but the external energy is inferior in quality. That, did I say marginal? The internal energy and the marginal energy, okay. That is the information we have from the Bhagavad Gita, because the living entity is classified as marginal energy and is of the same quality as the internal energy. It is quite natural for him to cooperate with the internal energy. But when the living entity prefers to cooperate with the external energy, he is put into difficulty by the process called pratyahara, diversion. Yoga diverts our energies from external to the internal. The energy of our senses is meant to be diverted, not stopped. The senses are to be purified so that they serve the Lord instead of disturbing his settled harmony. The entire cosmic harmony is a settled fact by the will of the Supreme. So we must find the Supreme will in every action of the cosmic situation. That is the instruction of the Ishopanishad. The human life is an opportunity to understand this cosmic harmony, and therefore our conserved energy, which is likened to the conserved water in the paddy field, must be used for this purpose only. As there is no chance of rain from the sky in autumn, we shall not immediately have a chance to get a human body again if we spend our conserved energy for sense enjoyment. The senses have their utility for the service of the Lord, and if properly engaged, they can reach the highest perfection by being directly engaged in the service of the Lord in his personal presence. When the living entity thus goes back home, back to Godhead, and engages in the personal service of the Lord, he is said to have attained samsiddhi parama, the highest perfection. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita. Mamupetya punarjanma dukhalayam shashvatam napnuvanti mahatmana samsiddhim paramam gata. After attaining me, the great souls, who are yogis in devotion, never return to this temporary world, which is full of miseries, because they have attained the highest perfection of life. Bhagavad Gita 8:15. 39. In the autumn, there is a gulf of difference between the day and the night. During the day, the extreme heat of the sun is unbearable, but at night the moonlight is extremely soothing and refreshing. Similarly, Lord Sri Krishna, is soothing for both the gopis and the mundane man in illusion who accepts the body as the soul. Prabhupada. As long as the living being under illusion accepts the body as the mind or the soul, he will always be unhappy, like a man in the burning heat of autumn. But when the same living being becomes a devotee of Lord Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, he at once lives a soothing life, as if under the cooling rays of the moon in autumn. Lord Sri Krishna is so merciful that he descends to reclaim suffering humanity and preaches the Bhagavad Gita with the intense desire that all living beings give up all their engagements and take shelter of his lotus feet. This is the most confidential part of all revealed scriptures. The example of the damsels of Rajabhumi Vrindavan, the gopis, is given here because these eternal consorts of the Lord terribly suffered the separation of Lord Krishna when the Lord was absent from their presence for his engagement in tending the cows in the forest. During the absence of Krishna, the entire day would appear to the gopis to be as unbearable as a hot day in autumn. The Lord so much appreciated this natural feeling of the gopis that he declared his inability to repay their intense love. Lord Chaitanya recommended the feeling of the gopis as the highest mode of worship that can be rendered to the Lord. The conclusion is that the regular practice of bhakti yoga will lead the devotee to the plane of intense love for the Lord, and that is the single qualification by which the conditioned soul is allowed to re-enter the eternal life of bliss in the kingdom of God. The threefold miseries of material existence are at once nullified by intense love of God, which is the ultimate goal of cultivating the human spirit. 40. In the clear autumn sky, the twinkling stars appear brighter and brighter, just like a transcendentalist with clear vision of the purpose of the Vedas. Prabhupada. It is said that the import of the Vedas becomes clear to one who is not only a sincere devotee of the Lord, but also a sincere servitor of the spiritual master. The spiritual master knows the purpose of the Vedas, practices it personally, and teaches the disciple of the true light of the Vedas. The supreme spiritual master, Lord Sri Krishna, teaches us the import of the Vedas in the following verse of the Bhagavad Gita. Dvav imau purusha loke sharash chakshara evacha sharak sarvani bhutani kutashto shara uchate. There are two classes of beings, the fallible and the infallible. In the material world, every entity is fallible, and in the spiritual world, every entity is called infallible. Bhagavad Gita 15:16. The Lord says that in the Vedas it is mentioned that there are two kinds of living beings. Bhagavad Gita 15:17. Yasmat sharamatitoham aksharadapi chotama atosmi loki vedecha pratita purushotama. Because I am transcendental, beyond both the fallible and the infallible, and because I am the greatest, I am celebrated both in the world and in the Vedas as that supreme person. Prabhupada. The import of the Vedas is still more explicitly explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The conclusion of the Vedic literatures is that Lord Sri Krishna is the primeval Lord and the cause of all causes. He has his eternal two-armed form as Shyamasundar, with features exactly like those of a most beautiful young man. And that is the sum and substance of the Vedas concerning God. God is one, but the living entities, including both the liberated and the conditioned, are many and have many different grades of positions. The living entities are never equal to God, but as parts and parcels of the Lord, they are eternally His servitors. As long as the living entities are situated normally as His servitors, they are happy. Otherwise, they are always unhappy. That is the Vedic conclusion. 41. In the clear sky of autumn, the beautiful moon among the beautiful stars becomes the cynosure of all eyes, just as Lord Sri Krishna is the central attraction in the Vrishni dynasty or in the family of Yadu. Prabhupada. The personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, appeared in the family of Yadu. And since then, the Yadu dynasty has been luminous like the moon in autumn. The appearance and disappearance of the Lord are similar to the appearance and disappearance of the sun. The sun is first seen on the eastern horizon, but that does not mean that the sun is the sun of that side. The sun is fixed in its own orbit, and it neither rises nor sets. But because we first see it on the eastern horizon, we may say that the sun rises on that side. Similarly, the appearance of Godhead in some particular family does not mean that He is limited by obligations to that family. He is fully independent and may appear and disappear anywhere and everywhere because He is all-pervading. Less intelligent persons cannot accommodate the appearance and disappearance of the Lord as an incarnation. But there is no sound reasoning to support such unbelievers. If God is all-pervading like the power of electricity, He can manifest himself at any place within his creation. When he is within, we cannot see him, but when he is without, he is seen by everyone, although very few know him as he is. Everyone sees the sun every day, but that does not mean that everyone knows what the sun actually is. Similarly, when Lord Sri Krishna was present 5,000 years ago, very few could know what he was. Anyone who comes to know him as he is becomes liberated at once. And while leaving this present body, such a knower goes back home, back to Godhead, never to return to this universe of manifold miseries. In the Bhagavad Gita, the Lord confirms this as follows. Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo vedi tattvata tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mam eti sorjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. Bhagavad Gita 4.9. But there are foolish persons who take him to be an ordinary man, not knowing the essence of his transcendental features. In Bhagavad Gita, the Lord affirms this. Avajananti ma'amudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature and my supreme dominion over all that be. Bhagavad Gita 9:11. 42. At night in autumn, the atmosphere is pleasant because it is neither very hot nor very cold. The mild wind blowing through the gardens of fruits and flowers in Vrindavan appeared very much pleasing to all but the gopis, who were always overtaken by heartfelt sorrow in the absence of Krishna. Prabhupada. There are two kinds of transcendental feelings for those engaged in the worship of the Lord. One is called Sambhoga, and the other is called Viraha. According to authorities in the disciplic line, Viraha worship is more palatable than Sambhoga worship. Sambhoga takes place in direct touch, whereas Viraha takes place without such direct contact. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught us to accept Viraha worship. In the present state of affairs, we cannot make any direct touch with the personality of Godhead. But if we practice the Viraha mode of worship, we can transcendentally realize the presence of the Lord more lovingly than in His presence. Without love of Godhead, there is no meaning even to direct contact. During the presence of the Lord, there were thousands and thousands of men, but because they were not in love of Godhead, they could hardly realize the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna. Therefore, we must first activate our dormant love of Godhead by following the prescribed rules and by following in the footsteps of the authorities who are actually fixed in love of Godhead. The gopis provide the highest example of such unalloyed love of Godhead. And Lord Chaitanya, at the ultimate stage of realization, displayed the Viraha worship in the mood of the gopis. In the mundane world, there is also some shadow of such Viraha. A loving wife, husband, or friend may for some time be maddened by the absence of the beloved. Such a state of mind, however, is not permanent. The loving husband or wife takes to another and forgets everything of the past. This is so because there is no reality to such relationships in the material world. The spiritual situation, however, is completely different. A bona fide lover of God could never forget Him, even in exchange for everything else. The devotee of the Lord cannot be happy in any circumstance without the Lord. In the absence of the Lord, the devotee associates with Him by remembering his separation, and because the Lord is absolute, the devotee's feeling of separation is transcendentally more relishable than direct contact. This is possible only when we develop genuine love for Him. In that state, the devotee is always with the Lord by feelings of separation, which become more acute and intolerable in suitable circumstances. The The mild wind reminded the gopis of the association of the Lord, and they felt separation from him acutely. 43. In the autumn season, all the birds, beasts, and men become sexually disposed, and the bull, the stag, the male bird, the man, and other male creatures forcibly impregnate the fair sex. A similar impregnation takes place as a result of devotional service to the Lord. Prabhupada, devotional service to the Lord never goes in vain. Just at the right moment, the result of one's particular devotional service will come, even if one has no desire for it. The pure devotees do not wish any return from the Lord in exchange for their service. They do not make business exchanges with the Lord, but the Lord, out of his own accord, fulfills all the desires of the devotees. It may appear that a devotee of the Lord is becoming poorer and poorer in terms of material prosperity, but factually he is not. The typical example is the Pandavas. The 5 brothers headed by King Yudhishthira underwent all sorts of difficulties because of the conspiracy of their cousins, headed by Duryodhana. But in the long run, King Yudhishthira was enthroned by Lord Sri Krishna, and his enemies were vanquished. King Yudhishthira was never disturbed by all the calamities that overcame them, even though Lord Krishna was ever their companion. The Pandavas never prayed to the Lord for anything but his devotional service, and in due time everything came out in the favor of the devotees. A devotee, therefore, should execute his devotional services with full energy, endurance, and confidence. He should perform his scheduled duties, he should be pure in heart, and he should serve in association with devotees. All 6 of these items will lead the devotee to the path of success. One should not be discouraged in the discharge of devotional service. Failures may not be detrimental. They may be the pillars of success. One must have good faith in the regulative principles followed by the self-realized souls, and one should not be doubtful about the ultimate result of such devotional service. Rather, one must go on executing his prescribed duties without hesitation, and one should never be influenced by unwanted association. We should not consider going back to Godhead a plaything. We must take it seriously, as enjoined in the scriptures. For a strict follower, the result is sure and certain, and when the time is right, the result will come of its own force. Dhruva Mahārāja went to worship God to gain something, but when he actually came in contact with God, he did not want anything from the Lord. The Lord, however, awarded Dhruva Mahārāja both benefits. That is, the Lord fulfilled his desires and also gave him eternal salvation. Such are the lessons we learn from all the revealed scriptures. The Almighty God awards the results we desire, and therefore we should desire that which is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. In devotional service we should not endeavor for that which is temporary and useless. 44. In the autumn season, all the reservoirs of water are full of lotus flowers. There are also flowers that resemble the lotus, but are of a different class. Among them is a flower called kumud. When the sun rises, all the flowers but the kumud blossom beautifully. Similarly, lotus-like men take pleasure in the advent of a responsible king, but men who are like the kumud do not like the existence of a king. Prabhupada. In this age of Kali, the people want their own government because the kings have become corrupt. Formerly, it was not like that. The sons of kings were trained under the guidance of a good Brahman Acharya, just as the Pandavas and the Kauravas were put under the instruction of the qualified Brahmin professor Sri Dronacharya. Princes were rigidly trained in politics, economics, the military arts, ethics and morality, the sciences, and above all, devotional service to the Lord. Only after such good training were the princes allowed to be enthroned. When such a prince became king, then too he was guided by the advice of good brahmanas. Even in the Middle Ages, Maharaj Chandragupta was guided by the learned Brahmana Chanakya Pandit. In a monarchy, one man sufficiently trained was competent enough to conduct alone the business of the state. But in a democracy, no one is trained like a prince. Instead, politicians are voted to responsible posts of administration by diplomatic arrangements. In place of one king or supreme executive officer in a democracy, there are so many quasi-kings. The president, the ministers, the deputy ministers, the secretaries, the assistant secretaries, the private secretaries, the undersecretaries, the PAs, and the MPs. There are a number of parties, political, social, and communal, and there are party whips, party whims, and so on. But no one is well enough trained to look after the factual interests of the governed. In a so-called democracy, in a so-called democratic government, corruption is even more rampant than in an autocracy or monarchy. Men who want to flourish in the guise of servants of the people do not want a good king at the head of the state. They are like the kumud flowers, which do not take pleasure in the sunrise. The word ku means bad, and mud means pleasure. Persons who want to exploit the administrative power for their own self-interest do not like the presence of a good king. Although professing democracy, they want themselves to be kings. Thus, they compete for votes by bad propaganda and take pleasure in having politics, but no king. Thieves and dacoits also take no pleasure in the presence of a good king, but it is the interest of the people to have a well-trained king as the head of the state. 45. After the new grains were cut and brought home from the paddy fields, the people began to observe the Navana ceremony everywhere in the presence of the Lord as Sri Krishna and Baladev. Prabhupada, according to Vedic culture, learned men consider all natural products such as food grains, fruits, flowers, and milk to be God-sent. No one can manufacture these things in man-made factories, however scientifically advanced people may be. People can make preparations of such God-sent foodstuffs, but they cannot manufacture the natural ingredients. Spiritually cultured men therefore feel obliged to the Lord when they get sufficient natural foodstuffs by the grace of the Lord. The Navana Prashana ceremony is observed as a way of acknowledging the gifts of God. Newly collected grains would first be offered to the Lord by the villagers, either individually or collectively, and in either case all members of the village would partake of the prasadam thus offered to the Lord. Such ceremonies make the people happy and prosperous. We should always acknowledge the mercy of God. We should not think that we can produce ample food grains merely with the help of tractors and fertilizers. These can help us only as instruments for such production. Without the sanction of the Lord, there is no possibility of having grains, even if there are trucks and fertilizers. When Lord Krishna and Baladev were present, the good men of Vrindavan realized that it was due to the presence of the Lord that their supply of food and grains were sufficient. Some of the people of Vrindavan, including Lord Krishna's father, Nanda Maharaj, used to perform sacrifices to propitiate King Indra, the king of heaven, because he is the controller of rains. Without good rains, grains cannot be produced, and therefore the people would offer sacrifices to Indra. Lord Sri Krishna, however, stopped this age-old ceremony and advised his father to offer the same sacrifice to the Supreme Lord. His purpose was to teach that we need not satisfy the various demigods in charge of the various departments of cosmic affairs. Instead, we must offer sacrifices to the Supreme Lord, for the Lord is the master and all others are his servants. The famous Anakut ceremony performed in Vrindavan especially, and also in all other parts of India, was thus introduced by the Lord, and people still follow this path by worshipping Govardhan Hill where the Lord used to take pleasure in tending cows. People also worship Giri Govardhan as identical with the Lord because there is no difference between God and his paraphernalia and pastimes. 46. The merchants, preachers, kings, and students who were confined to home during the 4 months, June, July, August, and September, began to flow out and attain success in life, just as perfected souls attain the required body as soon as they leave the present one. Prabhupada. The purpose in general, the people in general, especially the merchants, preachers, kings, and students, are advised not to leave home during the 4 months of the rainy season. These 4 months are known as Chaturmasya, and for everyone there are specific rules for observing this period, partly for the sake of health and partly for spiritual realization. During this period, the merchants cannot do free business. Dedicated souls like sannyasis cannot freely preach the doctrines of the Vedas. Kings cannot go out to tour their states, and students cannot go to their schools, which are closed. But after the Chaturmasya period, they all get the freedom to go out and perform their respective duties. And by doing so, they can achieve the results they desire. In the same way, one cannot achieve the desired results of one's penances until one attains freedom from the present body. There are various ways to practice the various kinds of yoga to attain various results in various spheres of life. It is not that everything is the same. There are varieties of life, varieties of planets, and varieties of success in spiritual realization. And all these can be achieved only when we have finished the Chaturmasya-like period of life. It is a foolish imagination, therefore, that we can go to other planets in the present body. If we want to go to Devaloka, the planets of the demigods, we must achieve the required qualifications. Then the same is true if we want to go back to the kingdom of God. If we want to remain on this planet in some better condition of life, that also will depend on the required achievements. In any case, those achievements can be fulfilled just after one leaves the body. The merchants, preachers, kings, and students form the 4 important sections of human society. The merchants should see that everyone gets his proper share of the food given as a gift by God. The sannyasi preachers should go from door to door to preach the sense of God consciousness, not to build mats and temples, but to enlighten the people. The king should go out from his home to see with his own eyes how things are going on. Maharaj Parikshit, while on tour, saw a man, Kali, attempting to kill a cow, so the king at once punished him. And students should gather knowledge wherever it is available. The combined work of these 4 sections is meant for the general welfare of society. 47. Huh? From the transcendence, which is called Krishna Loka, there emanates a glowing effulgence that resembles the tail of a comet. This glowing effulgence is unlimited, immeasurable, and unfathomable. Within this effulgence there are innumerable glowing planets, each of them self-luminous. Somewhere a limited part of that glowing effulgence is covered by material energy, just as a part of the sky is covered by a cloud. Within this material energy there are innumerable universes. In every universe there are innumerable material planets, and the earth is one of these planets. Thus we can understand what an insignificant part of the entire cosmos is this globe on which we live. Prabhupada. Krishna Loka, as above mentioned, is the residence of the personality of Godhead, the original transcendence. The glowing effulgence emanating from Krishna Loka is the personal glow of the Lord. The Almighty Lord, being full of inconceivable energies, expands himself in various forms and energies. There are forms from his energy as well as forms from his person. He has innumerable energies, and therefore he can do anything and everything as he desires. And these things take place immediately with all perfection. His energies are like the heat and light that expand from fire. The entire cosmic manifestation is nothing but an expansion of his energies. The energies are emanations from him, and therefore the emanations are simultaneously one with and different from him. The transcendence is compared to milk, and the emanations are compared to curd. Curd is nothing but milk, but at the same time it is different from milk. Curd is a milk preparation, but it cannot be used in place of milk. The Lord is also sometimes compared to a tree. The root of the tree is the cause of the trunk, branches, twigs, leaves, and fruits. Yet the trunk is not the fruit. The fruit is not the leaf, nor is the leaf the root. When water is needed, it has to be poured on the root, not on the leaves. Pouring water on the leaves serves no purpose, but pouring water on the root serves all purposes. This is the essence of the philosophy of spiritual culture. Krishna Loka is also called Goloka Vrindavan. Beneath this Goloka are Hari Dham, Mahesh Dham, and Devi Dham. Hari, Vishnu, Narayan, is the formal expansion of the Lord. Mahesh, Shiva, is the formal energetic expansion of the Lord. And Devi is the Lord's energetic expansion. The living entities are also energetic expansions of the Lord. There are two different kinds of living entities, called the liberated souls and the conditioned souls. The planets within the glowing effulgence are called Haridam. On these planets, the predominating deity is Hari, and the predominating deities are the liberated souls. The features of the liberated souls and those of Hari are almost the same. Yet Hari is predominator and the liberated souls are predominated. The innumerable planets in Haridam are predominated by different formal expansions of the Lord, and all of them have different names. The universes within the material energy are called Devidam, and within Devidam the predominating deity is Vishnu, who is assisted by Brahma and Shiva. Devidam is controlled by three modes, namely goodness, passion, and ignorance. Vishnu is the incarnation of goodness, Brahma of passion, and Shiva of ignorance. Brahma creates, Vishnu maintains, and Shiva destroys the material creation. The material creation comes into being by the will of the Lord, and it is again annihilated by his will. But although the universes of the material energy are thus created and annihilated, the planets in Haridam are ever existent. The conditioned living entities who wish to enjoy and not serve are given a chance within Devidam to seek liberation. Some of them enter Haridam, some of them enter Maheshdam, and some of them remain within Devidam. Maheshdam is the marginal place between Haridam and Devidam. The impersonalists who want to merge into the existence of the transcendence are placed within Maheshdam. Those who want to remain within the planetary systems of the material universes do so on various planets, but those who want to go outside the material energy can enter Haridam and go either to the various planets there or directly to Krishna Loka. The system of Bhakti Yoga makes one eligible to enter Haridam. The system of Jnana Yoga makes one eligible to enter Maheshdam. And the system of Karma Yoga obliges one to remain in Devidam and repeatedly be born and die, changing his material covering according to the standard of karma he performs. 48. The moon or Chandra Loka is one of the four important places of residence for the demigods. Beyond Manasa Lake is Sumeru Mountain. On the eastern side of this mountain is the planet Devadani, where Indra resides. On the southern side is the planet known as Samyamani, where Yamaraj resides. On the western side is the planet known as Nimlochati, the residence of Vayu. the demigod who controls the wind. And on the northern side of the mountain is the moon, which is also known as Vibhavari. Prabhupada, all these various planets are within the universe in which our planet is situated. Persons who are too materialistic always engage in sense enjoyment. Such persons worship the material demigods and goddesses to fulfill their material desires. They are fond of performing many yagyas to propitiate the various demigods and the forefathers in heaven. Such persons are automatically promoted to the moon, where they enjoy soma, a celestial beverage. The moon is too cold for the inhabitants of this earth, and therefore ordinary persons who want to go there with earthly bodies are attempting to do so in vain. Merely seeing the moon from a distance of 80,000 miles cannot enable one to understand the real situation of the moon. One has to cross Manasa Lake and then Sumeru Mountain, and only then can one trace out the orbit of the moon. Besides that, no ordinary man is allowed to enter that planet. Even those admitted there after death must have performed the prescribed duties to satisfy the Pittas and Devas. Yet even they are sent back to earth after a fixed duration of life on the moon. Men with developed consciousness, therefore, do not waste time making excursions, real or imaginary, to the moon. Such intelligent persons do not endeavor to achieve temporary sense enjoyment. Rather, they apply their conserved energy for the sake of spiritual cultivation. They discharge religious duties for the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord and not for personal sense enjoyment. The signs of such exceptional devotees of the Lord are that they are unattracted to material enjoyment, contented, pure in heart, attached to devotional service, free from affection for temporary things, and devoid of false ego. According to Vedic injunctions, such great personalities ultimately attain the place where the Supreme Personality of Godhead predominates and where there is no death, no birth, no old age, and no disease. On the way to these spiritual planets, such personalities pass through the sun line called Archir Marga. And on the way, they can see all the planets between here and the spiritual world. Oops. Bravo. Bravissimo. Victory. Jai, Jai. And now we'll take a few reflections or questions. Yes, Prabhu?
I made a lot of highlights, but I guess I'm just going to go to one that reminded me of a personal experience. Prabhupada was talking about the use of conserved energy, and he was using that example, which is likened to the conserved water in the paddy field, which must be used for this purpose only. And it just reminded me of my college coach was telling me, or he told our team all the time the importance of what he would call edging. And he would say, so we'd have, practice in the morning, we'd have workouts, we'd have to go to class, we'd have practice in the daytime or something like that. But edging was the things that you'd be doing in between that time to get better in your own time. And I was just thinking about the utilization of conserved energy, that it really is about like pockets of time and how much you utilize those pockets of time, because we show up, we do the things. I just think of like living in the temple. You go to Mangalarti, you follow the morning program, but then there's these pockets of time that actually make a big, big difference in your growth. And so I've just really, it reminded me how grateful I am to have had such a nice coach to say those things that instilled that in me. And now to reflect on that in spiritual life is really helpful.
Yeah, such a good point. So many moments in the gap. When I wrote Our Family Business, one of the processes that book and other books go through is there there's a way they look. They mean those who are doing the final checks on the book. Look for gaps. Sometimes there's extra space somewhere. Sometimes there's an unnecessary gap. And when you close all those gaps, you actually can get a whole page out of it. When you just ignore them and they're interspersed within the book, you don't even, to an untrained eye, you don't notice it. Once you remove them, and every page saved is saving money from the printing and the bulk of the book and so forth. So it reminded me of that a little bit. Yes, Mahendra.
Two questions. One was about the statement Prabhupada made that one attains the result of the practice even without wanting it.
What was that?
Even without desiring the result that comes. I just thought of that one of the most important is to have a strong desire, laulya, to attain the perfection. Some clarification on that, how you attain what you want without even desiring. And the other was about karma yoga. Prabhupada said it means you remain here, but isn't it that karma yoga is supposed to become detached and also attain the ultimate liberation?
Well, we discussed several times ways in which Krishna takes away anarthas or sinful reactions from people who inadvertently chant the holy name of the Lord. And as Ramchandra says, Sakradeva prapano yas tavasmiti chayachate, that if somebody one time says, I'm surrendering to you, he says, Dadam yeta matam mama, that I take him at his word, and from that day forward, I'm with you. And so there's a way in which Krishna recognizes the awakening of the soul, even though there may be some ambivalence after somebody does that. But it's kind of like when somebody signs a contract when they're in their proper state of mind. And that's what some of the contracts say. They say, were you in your right state of mind? Were you under duress when you said this? And so, if not, and you signed it, then later on, if you get in an altered state of mind and you don't want it anymore, too bad. You already signed the contract. And so Krishna protects us from ourselves by acknowledging that, oh no, you signed it, you surrendered, you said you wanted me, and even though now you've gone back on that because you have some sense of reluctance due to conditioning since the time immemorial, he's like, no, yeah, no. And Prabhupada mentions in the Nectar of Instruction that the devotee, Krishna will forcibly drag a devotee, even if there's a sense of reluctance. So that's part of his mercy. The word anugraha can be, graha means grabber. Like in astrology, you talk about the grahas. And anu means to follow. So anugraha, mercy, means to make somebody follow you. So the second one, karma bhyaparito hare priyataya vyaktim yayor jnaninas. The karma yogis make the cut in the Nectar of Instruction. And Prabhupada mentions that, karma bhyaparito, because the real meaning of karma is that you understand how to work the system. But you're still in that sense of, and that's the context. It has a couple of different contexts. Karma yoga can also mean the beginning of bhakti yoga. But it can also mean, have the context where it does in the Nectar of Instruction. It's just called karma. where you figure out how to elevate yourself in the material world following the rules of the Vedas. And compared to Haridam and everything else, it's rotting in the material world and doing useless stuff. It's not worth the paper it's printed on.
About the first, I just thought that perhaps also a meaning could be he attains the result even without desiring, in a sense that the devotee doesn't want in exchange of his service anything, but he wants to do the service. So he doesn't have a desire to be with the Lord personally or be liberated.
That's how you interpreted that purport?
Yeah.
Wow, I'm going to have to look at it again. You mean like Dhruva Mahārāja or something? Well, Dhruva was kind of reluctant, wasn't he? At first?
Yeah.
A little belligerent. Which number is this one? Here it is. Just as at the right moment, the result of one's particular devotional service will come, even if one has no desire for it. The pure devotees do not wish any return from the Lord in exchange for their service. They do not make business exchange with the Lord, but the Lord, out of His own accord, fulfills all the desires of the devotees. Yeah. But then there's a little further on. For a strict follower, the result is sure and certain. And when the time is right, the result will come of its own force.
So precise. On its own force.
Yeah, nice interpretation. Samya Prash?
On the same point. Well, on the same point, I was thinking about when it comes to the point of the result of one's particular devotional service will come even if one has no desire for it. It's not at the level of a pure devotee, but a Jamila did some service and then became completely bewildered from what service even meant, but he was saved from degradation. But notably, it's not that he went back to Godhead right away. He just developed a gratitude for what had happened and the Lord's intervention, so that he then continued prosecuting devotional service intentionally, I think at Haridwar, and then he went back to Godhead. So even at the level of, something other than being awarded the results of pure love of God, that whatever we do, gata sukriti, it's there. The damage is done, as you like to say.
Yeah, that's there in the story of Nriga also. Nriga asked how he came into in the association of the Lord. He recalls how he once gave a donation for a book at an airport. And then there's the Avaduta Brahmana, and it traces back to a time when he did some yajna, fruit of yajna, but still there was a time when he experienced a trace of devotion to God, and then that came back later. So even the smallest intention in devotional service, even if it's not noticeable at the time, it's a gyata. It has its own force that comes back and grabs the practitioner and pulls him along. Outside? Yadutama? Prabhu?
Okay, I think Haribol. I don't remember exactly which purport it was in, so maybe somebody can find it. But could you help me understand what Prabhupada means by, he's talking about Devi, and Mahadev, Lord Shiva. Said that Devi is the energetic form of the Lord, and then the Mahadev is the formal, energetic form. I'm going off memory right now, so I think that's what he said. Did anybody know where that is? I think it's, the formal energetic form and then the energetic form.
So, anyway, he was first of all, he's referring to a verse from the Brahma Samhita. Goloka namni nijadamni taleta tasya devi mahesha haridam sateshu teshu te te prabhava nichaya vihitashtayena govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. That was just a mention of the gradations. Lowest of all is located Devidam. Above Devidam is Maheshdam, abode of Mahesh. Above Maheshdam is Haridam, the abode of Hari. Above Haridam is Krishna's own realm, Nijadam, Goloka Vrindavan. And then in the Brahma Samhita you also find when Mahavishnu glances at the material nature, then there's Maya ya ramamanasya naviyogas tayasaha atmana ramaya remi tyakvakam shashikshaya. It's mentioned there that from the glance of Mahavishnu, the halo of that glance becomes Sadashiva. And then there's a manifestation of the consort of the Lord, who's an expansion of the Lord's internal potency, but she's the external energy, who then through the glance of the Lord enters into the material atmosphere. And then there's the counterpart of Shiva and Devi. And both of them are expansions of the Lord. They're, what are the terminologies used there? The energetic, formal, energetic.
Yeah, the formal energetic is Mahesh, and then the energetic form is Devi.
Yes, so they're the representatives of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the material world, only they're slightly altered because they're in touch with the material energy. Shiram yatara vikara vishesha yoga sanjayate nahitata pratagasti heto yasham bhutam apitata samupaiti karyat govindam adipurusham tamaham bhajami. So Sham Mahesh, he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead just as much as yogurt is milk, because yogurt and milk are really the same, except for it's slightly, yogurt is transformed because of its touch with an acid. Like if you pour a little buttermilk or put some other acidic thing, then it coagulates. And so similarly, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is the formal energetic for the material world, and then he also has his counterpart, his expansion, who's Devi, who's the energetic, formal energetic and energetic. And that's in the section of the Brahma Samhita, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur describes how everything we see anywhere has these counterparts. And for instance, like a yin and yang, the formal energetic, the energetic, and that's because everything expands from the Lord originally, who's the supreme energetic, and then he has his counterpart, Srimati Radharani, and then in the material world, same thing, but pervertedly so, because of the touch of the material energy. Patita Pavana. And then we have more outside.
I just wanted to read this paragraph I put here. The energy of our senses is meant to be diverted, not stopped. The senses are to be purified so that they serve the Lord instead of disturbing his settled harmony. And then it says, the entire cosmic harmony is a settled fact by the will of the Supreme. So we must find the Supreme Will in every action of the cosmic situation. That is the instruction of Ishopanishad. The human life is an important opportunity. The human life is an opportunity to understand this cosmic harmony, and therefore our conserved energy, which is likened to the conserved water in the paddy field, must be used for this purpose only. I just appreciated the way Srila Prabhupada worded it, and he's taking, I suppose it would be the invocation from the Ishopanishad, or in the way he's presenting it.
I was thinking more Ishavasamidam Sarvam. The invocations also, they kind of go together. So now we have Kulavecha. And who else had their hand up back there? Okay.
Thank you.
Aravinda and Vaishnavi, after you.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about this purport in the verse 29. Srila Prabhupada says, the material sky is also the spiritual sky, but it is covered by the molds of material nature. This material nature is also a temporary creation of the Lord, as the cloud is a creation of the sun. When the cloud of the material molds is cleared of the material nature, it's said to have been annihilated. So I just want to ask you to help me to understand. It's like this spiritual sky is the same as the material sky. So we should understand like this Maya is all just like a dream. It's a full dream, and maybe we wake up and actually there is not material world as it is. It's just our covering.
The analogy of waking up is apt. It's used frequently in the Bhāgavatam, and there's a way in which when when Narada mentions that he had risen above the modes of material nature, he saw that I and the Lord are the same, and there's a recognition of the fact that illusion is a dreamlike state, or as it's described, cloudy or foggy-like state. And it's not that it doesn't exist. It does exist, but it's a separated energy. Krishna doesn't deny that it's there. He says, Bhumir apo nolo vayu kamano buddha evacha hankara ityame binna parkutirashada. So binna means separated. So there's separated energies, and it's separated by consciousness. When one's not conscious of the connection of any of Krishna's energies to him, then it becomes Maya. Ritertam yat pratyeta, na pratyeta chatmani, tadvidyat atmanomayam yatabaso yatatamaha. Krishna told Brahma, there's a way that when you forget where the energies are coming from and that they're part of me, and you don't see them in relationship to me, then that's Maya. And when you do see that they're in relationship with me, as Krishna gives us all kinds of fodder for that in the Bhagavad Gita, bija mam sarvabhutanam vidiparta sanatanam, etc., that the seed, the ability in human beings to do something, the scent of the earth and so forth, it's all me. So when you make that connection, then you see everything in relationship to Krishna. So I'm resisting that idea that, well, there was no material world in the first place, because there is quite clear descriptions of the structure and function of the material world, including the different coverings that are 10 times thicker and so forth. And there is a discussion of how there's a viraja, there's a crossover point between the material and spiritual energies. So there is a realm, as we already described, from Brahma Samhita. There's Devi Dham. That's an area. So that it's not that, okay, it never existed, we were always in the spiritual sky, we're just asleep and dreaming it. It was false. It's not false, it's just a temporary energy. but it is a distinctive energy. Vishnu Shakti Paraprokta Kshetra Gyakya Tatapara Avidya Karma Sangyangya Tritiya. Tritiya means three. Shakti Rishate. Krishna has three Shaktis. One's internal, one's external, and the other's marginal. So they're all three are there. And the soul, when he gets caught up in fruitive activities due to misuse of independence, he gets implicated in the material world. When he wakes up from that, decides to cooperate with the Lord, then there's no impediment from the modes of material nature. As Prabhupada said earlier in the Bhāgavatam, just because you're in contact with the material world doesn't mean you're captured by it. It's only when you decide to engage it in your service, instead of in Krishna's service, that you become implicated. I don't know if that helped or not, but it's a
yes.
The question you did. Okay, thank you. Charnaravinda Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. In number 32, Prabhupada says that talks about the fraudulent transcendentalists, the sannyasis who live luxurious lives at the cost of others, and then he goes on to explain that a real sannyasi should be free from all anxieties and should be for the purpose of uplifting entire human society from materialism, and sannyasis should be free from all desires and anxieties and cares. Otherwise, they're no value to human society. So how is it possible to be a sannyasi uplifting entire human society from materialism and be free from cares and anxieties? Because it seems like as soon as you try and uplift human society, you have to take on responsibility for people's spiritual lives and start spiritual projects. So how does that work, please?
Well, once, and I put this in my book, the first book, that it was a conversation between one of Prabhupada's disciples and Prabhupada, and this person was a leader, governing body commissioner, and he said, Prabhupada, devotees are telling me how there's so much anxiety in distributing books. And they're wondering about that sense of anxiety. And Prabhupada said, no, tell them, explain to them, that is spiritual anxiety. And then he gave the example of Yashoda. And he said, she's always in anxiety. What's Krishna gotten into now? Is he going to run away? Did he eat dirt? And where is he right now anyway? He said he's in constant. He said, but that's spiritual anxiety. So he said that also in the building of the, it was funny, and there's a huge temple in Toronto, Canada. It was built by selling lollipops, actually. And there's a story about how Prabhupada was preaching about how we don't want to take on any anxiety for building things and getting involved in this and that. And then somebody found that temple, and Prabhupada said, we must have it. And Uddhama Shloka was there at the time. He said, but Prabhupada, you said we shouldn't be in anxiety. And Prabhupada said, there must be anxiety. So there's two varieties of anxiety. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, the anxiety I take from my spiritual master is my greatest pleasure. As if you don't take that kind of anxiety, there's going to be another kind of anxiety, which is, how do I take care of my body, and it's falling apart, I don't like the way the back of my head looks, or whatever it may be. Are these bell bottoms, I thought they were out of style, I thought these fit, blah, blah, blah. So there's always something to worry about on the material plane. You know, there's a section in the Brihat Bhagavatamrita where the shanti of the yogi and so forth, like achieved shanti, it's excoriated there. They say, like, we don't believe in that. Vaishnavas don't want that. They don't want peace. They want to be in full anxiety for the Lord. And that's an acquired taste. It's kind of like bitter melon. Some people don't like it. But once you get a taste for it, then you can't leave it alone. Vaishnavi?
Hi, Krishna Prabhu. I'm On number 48, the last one we read just now, it mentioned there that the signs of such exceptional devotees of the Lord who are unattached to material enjoyment, and it says ultimately they attain the place where the Supreme Personality of Godhead predominates, where there's no death, birth, old age and disease. And it says there, on the way to these spiritual planets, such personalities pass through the sun line called Archir Marg, and on the way they can see all the planets between here and the spiritual world. So just trying to understand that, I was thinking maybe possibly, I don't know if it's the correct way of thinking, but maybe if, for example, if a child is waylaid and then when they come back to the father takes him on a ride and shows him all the places he's been and how far he's achieved, and then takes him back home. How would we understand that?
It's up to the devotee. Prabhupada mentions this in the second canto of the Bhāgavatam. He describes how there's different desires devotees have, different moods. It's not stereotype. So we're all individuals. So he said some devotees on their way back to Godhead, they like to see that, as you just described. That I want to see what the whole thing looks like and where I was. And he said others aren't interested in that at all. They don't even want to see it. They just, let's go. Let's not even take a look. Don't want the scenic route. Just go straight. Take the I-5, not the 101. So that's a California thing, sorry. So that he said those are representative of the different moods of devotees as far as the material world goes. So there's different ones. There's different moods. Does that help? Vaishnavi?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, we have Krishna Saka.
When you say that devotees want anxiety, they don't want peace. I was on book distribution with one of our devotees at ISV, Achyut Balram Prabhu, and I was, because of work, there was some anxiety going on, and I was like, for a couple of months it was going on, and I was like, Prabhu, I'm telling that, the Bhagavad Gita, this will help you get free from stress and anxiety, but I am in stress. I want peace, Prabhu, I want peace. And he's like, Prabhu, you don't want peace, believe me, you will not like it. And then after some time, as all things must pass, actually it was like peaceful situation, and there was nothing going on, and I was like, yeah, peace is boring actually.
Yeah, there's a way in which I just, in the little petri dish of, it's kind of Silicon Valley. For years we've been setting goals and ratcheting up whatever we're doing, little higher, little higher, little higher. And at a certain time we thought, God, maybe we're pushing the devotees too much. And I remember once, after one marathon after another. And then we had for Radhastami, and I talked it over the Sankirtan leaders, and they said, listen, everyone can just go out, but we won't have any goal. And all the devotees came back and they complained, and they said, this is horrible. Where's the goal? And they said, we don't want that anymore. That's awful when you take it away. They wanted something to, that sense of achievement. And Prabhupada said the leader should always create a fresh challenge so the devotees will want to rise up and meet it. And within that, there's some sense of anxiety. But it gets resolved when the devotees do everything they can, and then they reach it and they realize that it wasn't us that did it, it was Lord Chaitanya. And they get more and more faith. Because even in the next one they think, yeah, but last time was different. But they have to keep building on that sense of taking risk. Prabhu, go ahead. And then Sudhira.
I just, this regarded, you were saying in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, where they're saying, Vaishnavas, we don't abide by
shanti.
the shanti rule. I was thinking about when Gopakumar first enters into Goloka Vrindavan, and he's saying, this feeling, I couldn't tell if it was agonizing pain or unadulterated bliss. It was like happening both simultaneously, and I just think it reminds me of a verse in the Madhya Lila in the 2nd chapter where he's talking about Mahaprabhu's experiences of ecstasy, that it's like drinking boiling hot sugarcane juice. It's like there's a sense of it's like you can't handle it, but you can't resist it either. It's so amazing.
Wow, that's nice citations. Bana? Oh, Sudhir was next. You had your hand up. Go ahead.
I like the statement from 46 text, which says, if we want to go to Devaloka, the planets of the demigods, we must achieve the required qualifications. And the same is true if we want to go back to the kingdom of God.
I was remembering the early days of book distribution. I was talking with David Rotten, one of his friends today, and how magical that time was, and how, we were talking about goals and things. But it was such an amazing time because we didn't know in the beginning we could actually sell books on their merit. And in the beginning, because there were hardly any books, devotees would just go down to Market and Pound, stick out incense, stop a person, they'd give a donation, then we'd give them a magazine. And when they started figuring out we can actually sell these books to people outside that aren't devotees, it was such a magical time. Yeah, I remember devotees, went downtown and somebody sold a couple big books for the first time, and all the devotees in the temple got together, like, how'd you do it? What'd you say? Like, I remember I went out and I distributed 4 big books. I came back to the temple and I was like a celebrity. And the devotees like, wow, we can actually do this? And then devotees started going door to door, and then devotees started just doing the unimaginable, selling that, the little Krishna trilogy sets, Krishna books, and devotees are selling 10, 15, 20, and Sarvabhauma broke the records and sold I think 80 and then 100, and it was such a magical time in terms of increasing the limits on what we thought we could do, and how the whole movement, it was such a magical time also because the whole movement was built by the devotees forced to come up to a higher level of faith, because we had no other means to support the movement. I just reflecting on that today.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder, Bana. I would say also it's still a magical time. It's just a matter of what we want to do. Because just recalling in recent history, when Bhadra Purnima started, 2 years in a row, it was flat. It was 7,000. Although that was a huge spike from where we started, but I was thinking, okay, let's just keep going. And then 7,000, then the next year was 7,000. Then it was a sense, okay, we got to break out of this. I was at Tirupati at a GBC meeting, a midterm GBC meeting, and I made an announcement in front of all the GBCs, and everybody gathered there, and they said, 2020, we're doing 10,000 sets of Bhagavatams. I'm vowing it in front of the deities and in front of the whole assembly of devotees right after Bhagavatam class. And then the pandemic started. And there was a time when many of the devotees around the world were saying, it's impossible, we'll just sit it out. And then one thing led to another, and the attitude changed, and the devotees did 24,000 instead of 10. And then it went up from there to 36,000. And so I'm just saying the magic's always in the air, and the same energy that I see we experienced and still can experience and still do when the devotees first started going out on book distribution. I see it in the devotees who go out now. They don't want to come back because they're in that internal energy. it's palpable, and it's, to me, it's the same thing, and it's not it was a heady time, but I'm just saying that goes on, and it's just a matter of what we want to do. If we want to challenge ourselves for the next levels and try to expand in those ways. Mahendra, Prabhu? Oh, no, okay. And we have Devavrata on the outside.
Yeah, just speaking about how one can still tap into that flow of mercy in regards to book distribution. I remember when I joined, which wasn't so long ago, but when I first started distributing books, doing 3 big and big books to a person was considered really good, and then there was the whole idea of Saptarishi, which came out, and then that was kind of a big thing. But now I'm seeing that the standard, at least at university distribution, is that everyone should be encouraged to distribute a Bhagavatam. And it doesn't matter whether you've been around for a long time or it's your first time on traveling Sankirtan. It's just become the norm that devotees are distributing sets of Srimad Bhagavatam in the public to people that are coming up to book tables, to people who've never heard of the Srimad Bhagavatam. They're taking full sets, 18-volume sets of Srimad Bhagavatam, 9-volume sets of Chaitanya Charitamrita, and it's just a matter of the desire. So I'm seeing that there's, in your offering to Srila Prabhupada this year, you mentioned that we have pacemakers, and people who set the pace, and how the bar has been lifted, and the standard is completely different for a devotee who's joining the movement now, even to a devotee who was joining the movement 10 years ago. In terms of what we can assume can be done, it's increased, and now new bhaktas are able to distribute sets of Srimad Bhagavatam to people who've never heard of the Srimad Bhagavatam in their entire life.
Thank you so much. Beautiful observation. Well, we could take a little break right after Samya Prash makes a point.
A couple things. One, in the purport about it's the same purport that we've been glorifying over and over again, that Mahendra was talking about. Just at the right moment, the result of one's devotional service will come, even if one has no desire for it. Prabhupada, he talks about, he paraphrases Nectar of Instruction, following Utsaha Nishchaya Dharya Tatat Karma Pravartanat Sangha Tyagat Satovrite. He puts it in his own words. And then he basically says again in a couple different ways that the result comes automatically. And then he says something really amazing, because he kind of just, after telling us how liberal Krishna is, he concludes by saying this: we should not consider going back to Godhead a plaything. We must take it seriously. As enjoined in the scriptures, for a strict follower the result is sure and certain. And when the time is right, the result will come of its own force. So on the one hand, the devotee is leaning so heavily on Krishna's incredibly merciful nature, and at the same time they're not kicking, putting their feet up and just like, okay, like where I'm not like Arjuna, right? I'm just gonna not fight. What did Prabhupada say? He didn't smoke ganja. He didn't just sit there. He fought a war. So the devotee is simultaneously trusting that Krishna makes up for everything and also going really hard. They're really serious. And I thought that was very complete. And the other thing I wanted to bring up is how Prabhupada says a lot earlier, we should not be disappointed in our muddy life of material existence. And then in this paragraph where he says that, he basically paraphrases the entire first verse of the Shikshastakam, in my opinion. For as soon as we voluntarily take to the devotional service of the Lord, our whole life becomes clear like water in autumn. That's Chetudarpanam Arjanam. Devoid of our relationship with God, our life is barren, but as soon as the muddy mind is cleared by spiritual association or cultivation of the human spirit, the threefold miseries of material life are at once cleared off. Bhavamahadavagni nirvapanam. Thus the lotus of knowledge gradually fructifies, right? Vidyavadu jivanam. And this gradual process of development ushers in transcendental bliss, anandam buddhivardhanam. And I was thinking how Prabhupada can take an analogy that the Bhagavatam used, present that threaded with the verse of the first Shikshastakam in an English language, which is just structurally and technically so far from Sanskrit and so limited. And then also make it accessible to, I've seen it, people who know nothing about bhakti hear this and I'm like, yeah, that's great. Who could do that? That's unbelievable. So, Haribol.
Nicely done, nicely done. Okay, last one.
This one from Divyanga Prabhu and Mukharavinda Prabhu.
We have two, one from Divyanga Prabhu and one from Mukharavinda Prabhu.
Divyanga Prabhu said, take shelter of the holy name as your only business.
Haribol.
Mukharavinda Prabhu. Amazing purports. Really gave a lot of hope that how practice of bhakti yoga will bring all the perfection in due course of time. Text 43 purport. The conclusion is that the regular practice of bhakti yoga will lead the devotee to the plane of intense love for the Lord, and that is the single qualification by which the conditioned soul is allowed to re-enter the eternal life of bliss in the kingdom of God. Also text 46 purport. And all of these can be achieved only when we have finished the Chaturmas-like period of life.
Right. Thanks for bringing that one up, Mukharavinda. That is a very encouraging and also astounding purport. When Prabhupada compares our human life to a Chaturmasya-like period. And it's something that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also mentions in his commentary, the 6th canto, about Ajamil, that when a tree grows, it produces fruit at its own pace. You can't make it go faster. When it comes, it comes. And he also said, sometimes Krishna allows a devotee to experience the full fruit of his chanting, but after he leaves his body, or not until he does. And then he says the most amazing thing of why. He says, because if every devotee got the full results of their chanting immediately, then it would discourage the jnanis and the yogis. Because he wants to give free will to everybody, and if somebody has a different path, he doesn't want bhakti to be so stacked up that everyone feels morose, that what about my path? He wants them to feel free to explore their other path without feeling that they're getting trounced by the bhakti path. So let's take a break, and we'll come back here at 20 minutes to 6 o'clock. Gaur Premanande Haribol. See you back.